All right, I just wanted to speak about this subject I've heard before, and I've actually spoken to a few people who actually hold this theological view, and basically in a nutshell, if you haven't heard of this before, what the belief is that that like there's two gods in the Bible. The real God of the Bible is Jesus in the New Testament. However, the God in the Old Testament, which is supposed to be the Father of Christ, that's actually Satan, right? So the God in the Old Testament that you read about, that's not actually the real God, but that's actually the devil. That's the belief that people have, right? The God in the Old Testament that you read about, that is Satan in disguise as God. But Jesus is the real God of the Bible. So that's basically what they believe. And, I find it a very, well, of course, it's a very laughable and stupid belief, but, some of the arguments they make are very laughable. But, they can clearly dupe somebody that's not, you know, knowledgeable in the Bible, if that makes sense. So some of the things they'll say is like, say, for example, the global flood, right, that you read about in Genesis chapter 6, to the ninth chapter, where God brings a flood upon the entire world, which, by the way, it was a global flood, right? Worldwide flood. It wasn't a local flood, because some people believe it was like local, meaning like, how on Earth today there's some towns that get, major flooding. They might get, 20 feet of flooding from a hurricane or something. Some people believe that that's like what happened. That there was like, a couple towns might have got flooded, but it wasn't like around the entire world. But no, the Bible makes it clear it was around the entire world. So that's another false doctrine, but that's a video for another time. Um, but they believe that that was Satan who made that flood, right? So Satan was the one who spared Noah, his sons, their wives, and all the animals on the ark. That was Satan who told Noah to build that ark. That's what these guys believe. And you want to know a very laughable belief that these guys have? I asked this one dude who believes this. Um, Here's the question, and I basically set him up for the spiritual knockout, right? I set his ass up for the kill shot, so to speak. So I asked him, it's like, okay, so since Satan's the God of the Old Testament, would you then say that the God that let the Israelites out of the land of Egypt, right, with the Exodus story, so the God that worked with Moses to let the people free that were in bondage in Egypt, was that Satan? And he said yes. So the God that parted the Red Sea, right, in Exodus, what is that? Exodus 14th chapter, about the Red Sea crossing. Um, and the hell going back to Exodus 12, right, with plagues brought upon Egypt, and especially the last plague where the firstborn sons got killed. That was Satan who did all that. That's what this guy told me. It's like, damn, that was Satan who did all those things. So then I asked him plainly, and this is what I wanted him to say yes or no on. So wait a second. So if Satan was the God who, let all these people go and gave them the law, so are you saying that Satan is the God of the Israelites? That the Israelites are Satan's chosen people? And he said yes. He said yes. So Satan was the one who gave the Israelites the law to follow. So here's where I cut him to shreds, right? I cut his ass deep. He's going to need some stitches for this one. So what I asked him is like, okay, so if Satan is the God of the Old Testament and the God of the Israelites, why is Jesus, aka the real God, according to him, why is Jesus teaching people to obey the law in the Old Testament? So why is Jesus teaching people to obey Satan's law? When I asked him that, he was absolutely confounded. Like he had no way to answer that question logically. All he could do was say, well, ask something else, because he doesn't really know. But I mean, that absolutely annihilates his ass right there. If Satan is the God of the Old Testament and the God who gave the Israelites the law because they're his chosen people, so why is Jesus, aka the real God, saying that you should believe and follow the law that Satan gave then? I can clearly prove it. Matthew chapter 5, verse 17 to 19. Christ clearly said, hey, look, I didn't come to do away with the law. Anybody who teaches men to break the very least of the law in the Old Testament, he's going to be least in the kingdom of heaven. But he that teaches men to keep the law, he's going to be great in the kingdom of heaven. And then he also said, one jot or one note, or no tittle, will in no wise pass from the law until all things are fulfilled. So wait a second. So what law was Christ talking about there? Obviously, he was talking about the law of the Old Testament. And if these guys argue and say, well, what they do is they'll try to say, well, Jesus made his own law. But wait a second, I can undeniably prove that's not the case. Because Christ spoke about that he didn't come to do away with the law. So what law we was talking about? How could he come to do away with the law if the law didn't exist before he was on the scene, but he brought it? So that undeniably proves he was quoting something that was in existence before he was on the earth. So that's undeniable. So again, it's astonishing to me. It's very astonishing to me how, anybody can make a statement and say, well, Satan's the God of the Old Testament. Because again, it clearly is not true. That's how these people think, because they don't logically use their brains. They just believe whatever they're told, and well, that's it. Bear with me a second. Excuse me. So another thing that they'll try to do is they'll point to, certain times in the Old Testament where we see God, killing people, like say for an example, when Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac in Genesis chapter 22, right? Well, that was Satan, right? That was Satan who was going to make him sacrifice his son. Or, they'll go to other points where, God killed a bunch of Israelites that, rebelled, or God will tell the Israelites to go sack a city and kill everybody, including women and children and the cattle, and stuff like that. They'll use all these examples of God killing and saying, well, see, that's Satan because God doesn't kill. And you see, that's the misconception, is because they were raised with that false myth about the Bible that God is all about love, love, love. But that's not true. God both loves and he hates, according to the Bible. So again, the whole narrative that it's being based upon is a false narrative. Right? They're clearly basing this on a false narrative that they were raised with. And it's not their fault, they were just raised to think this way. So they're just regurgitating what they were told, and they don't know better, But here's the kicker, though. Here's the funny part, is they'll talk about how, well, the Old Testament God is Satan because we see him killing people. But then they'll negate the fact that we see in the New Testament where it speaks about Christ and how when he returns for his second coming, he's going to kill people. Like, what about Luke chapter 19, verse 27? It says, bring my enemies before me and slay them before me. Or what about Revelation chapter 19? It speaks about Christ coming back and making war with the armies of the world, and that he would slay them. It says the sword that comes out of his mouth, which that's parabolic, but it's saying that he's going to slay the armies of the world. And there's many other examples. What about, Judgment Day? What about, Matthew chapter 25, starting at 31 on down, right? There's two groups of believers. The one group, they claimed to believe and they had faith and works to demonstrate that they did believe. But the other group, they just claimed to believe, but then they lacked the works that Christ was looking for. So he saved the one group, but then the other group that didn't have the works that he was looking for, he rejected them and sent the angels. He commanded the angels to gather them up and cast them into the fire. So wait a second, so didn't Christ kill them? Because he commanded that they should be gathered up and cast into the fire. Or what about, here's another one for you. What about Matthew chapter 10, verse 28? It says, don't fear man, the one that can destroy the body but not the soul. But fear him, the one that can destroy both the body and the soul in hell. So what about that one? How do you guys get around that? So these are clearly multiple places in the New Testament where it speaks about Christ, which you guys believe is the true God, right, in the Bible. So how do you guys get around that? I mean, you can't now make the statement and say, well, in that instance, it's Satan. Because what this guy tried to do is he tried to make an argument and say, well, anytime in the Bible, right? Because after I cut his ass to shreds, he had to backtrack and say, well, um, anytime in the Bible you see about killing, that's actually Satan, right? So these instances that I'm proving where Jesus says that he's going to do this when he returns, that's actually Satan making himself look like Jesus. Again, these are the mental gymnastics these guys have to jump through. These are this is the self-contradictory of these guys. They'll say that Jesus is the God of the New Testament and the true God of the New Testament. But then when we see parts where Jesus talks about judging people when he returns, that's not Jesus now. Now that's Satan. It's like, what the hell? So again, it just shows that these people are just delusional and unclear in their own heads as to what they actually believe. So again, this whole idea, this whole myth, because that's exactly what it is. It's completely a myth. It's a bogus belief that the God of the Old Testament is actually the devil. But here's the bombshell, right? This is the knockout right here. This is somebody calling Ambalam because anybody who believed this, they just got knocked out cold with this last one I'm going to give you here. How could the God of the Old Testament be the devil? If in Job chapter 2, we see God and Satan having a conversation. Like it literally says, and God said unto Satan, right? And Satan said unto God. Read it. Job chapter 2. God and Satan were in heaven having a conversation with one another. They're having a conversation about Job, right? Satan said, hey, well, let me, test him. Let me bring certain hardships on him. And he won't want to believe in you anymore. God said, hey, look, I'll let you, go and, do certain things to him, but you can't kill him, though. And Satan said, oh, okay, a challenge accepted. I'm putting into, simple understand terms, but you can read it yourself. That's what it is in a nutshell, basically. But again, this completely annihilates the belief because, wait, if the God of the Old Testament is the devil, but I can show you where God and Satan are having a conversation, how the hell could you then say, well, who is this other God that Satan's having a conversation with? Because isn't he the God? So if Satan is having a conversation with God, then who is Satan then? He can't be Satan and God at the same time in the context. So how the hell do you guys get around that? Again, it just shows the mental gymnastics that these characters have to jump through. It's like, it's amazing to me. It's amazing to me the self-contradictory and the denialism. Like, these guys just don't want to accept the fact that the God of the Bible, he loves and he hates and he kills. Right? He gives man life and he can take man's life. That's what the Bible teaches. So anybody that doesn't teach that, well, you're teaching a lie about the Bible. It's just that simple. And this is not a hard concept to understand. This is very simple and very easy to understand. It's just, a lot of people want to hold on to that, the fairy tales that they were raised with, to believe that, the God of the Bible, he wouldn't hurt a fly, right? God wouldn't hurt a fly, because it's all about love, love, love. That's not true. I mean, the Bible is a dark book, man. It's a bloody and dark book. And the Christian church won't tell you about that. They'll skip over certain verses and won't talk about it. But again, that's the denialism. Like, I'll give another verse. What is it? Exodus chapter 15, verse 3. It says, for the Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. Right, so that they'll skip over that one too. Right, God's a man of war. Wait a second, I thought that you guys said that God's all about love. So they're cut. Anyway, shalom.